For this peony painting, I used 5 acrylic paint colors, all artist quality. I used titanium white, cadmium-free yellow medium, cadmium-free red medium, quinacridone red, and ultramarine blue. I'm painting onto an 8x8 inch canvas panel which I previously gessoed. I'm using one brush, a size 8 flat Princeton Aspen. It's a smooth brush which, if you turn it to its side, it's very thin, and it allows me to paint a variety of brush strokes using the same brush. So let's get painting. I start with a deepish value of pinky red. I use quite a bit of quinacridone red along with some cadmium red. I then add a small amount of ultramarine blue to deepen the value. For my first brush strokes, I want to show where the darkest parts of the flower are, which is the base of the petals since sunlight doesn't reach there easily. Petals are a C shape, so you'll be painting a lot of C shapes at most steps of this painting. I'm starting with the darkest parts of the petals close to the center, and I've decided that the center of the flower is in the upper right, so my first brush strokes are around that area. A peony is sort of shaped like a ball with the petals wrapping loosely in a ball shape, so keep that in mind. Use a variety of lengths and widths as you paint your petals. Some will be long and skinny, while others are shorter and wider. You can change the width of the shape as you paint a single brush stroke by pressing more lightly, then with more pressure, and then lightening your pressure again. Continually add more paint to your brush to ensure you have enough paint on your brush. I apply paint to both sides of the brush, and you can see me flip the brush back and forth on the palette. Once you have quite a few petals started, we'll start adding a more mid-tone value. Do that by adding a bit of white to your previous mix. You might need to add some more cad red and quin red if you don't have enough of your previous mix left. Now start adding this mid-tone mix to parts of the petal next to the darkest areas. Now this step can be a little bit tricky to keep track of. Keep in mind that some petals curve upwards and some curve downwards. Now don't worry too much if you get it wrong, especially at this stage. You'll do so many layers that you can correct it later. And this is a very loose painting, so you don't have to be perfect. Carry on painting somewhat large brush strokes in the mid-tone color. You'll start filling in quite a bit of the unpainted area of the painting, although it will take quite a few more layers and a bit more time before we've completely covered the canvas. I've decided to have my peony color be a bit pink, so my mix leans closer to a pinkier color. Because of that, I used more quin red than cad red. And for the most part, I keep it close to the same ratio throughout. There are some exceptions to this, and you'll see that later on in the painting. Next, let's add some of the lighter value to the petals. Add some white to your mix. Again, if you need more of the red, add a bit more quin red and cad red. Take your lighter pink color and paint it at the top part of the petals. When I say the top part of the petals, I mean the part of the petal that is furthest from the center of the blossom, so it generally gets the most light. Since the petals in the painting point upwards or downwards, as I mentioned earlier, you'll need to keep track of which petals you want to point upwards in the painting and which you want to point downwards. In some cases, such as the petals near the bottom of the painting, the top part of the petal itself is towards the bottom of the petal visually in the painting itself. Apply this lighter hue to all the petals you've already painted. Just like at your other steps, you'll continue to cover more and more of your canvas. Each petal is a similar shape but unique, so apply the lighter tone wider in some areas than others. Now, I still have quite a few empty areas on the canvas, and I'm mixing some of the deeper color to start adding more petals. Using a combination of cad red, quin red, and a tiny bit of ultramarine blue, I add more petals using the same technique from earlier where I paint C shapes where the deepest parts of the petals are, varying the length and width. I add a bit more blue to the mix to get a deep purple color and apply this in a few areas to add a bit more depth and variety to the petals. As you do this, you might notice your color getting a bit lighter as some wet paint from your lighter layers mixes with the dark color. Allow this to happen because it can add some energy to your painting. And now that you see your petals are taking form, consider how some petals point towards you so you don't see that much of an actual petal. That's known as foreshortening. While others you can see quite a bit of them, so you would apply more paint. It seems obvious, but it's easy to keep repeating the same shape over and over, which is something you want to avoid. You want a variety of shapes, sizes, and angles to your petals, keeping in mind where the petals would naturally sit, of course. We have a decent start to our petals, but let's take a moment to focus on the central area of the peony. Using a clean brush, start with some of the cad yellow and just a touch of cad red. Bring in a tiny bit of ultramarine blue to darken it. Now, if that mix is getting a little bit green, add a bit more red. You're aiming for a very warm, muted yellow that can work as a shadow color. I apply this color towards the top of the center, where the upper petals would provide shade from the sun. I add a bit more red to warm it up even more in some areas. Next, clean your brush and get some pure cad yellow. Begin applying this to the part of the center that would get some sun. Turn your brush to the side so that you can give the impression of the soft stamens. As you do this, your yellow will mix with your previous layers which haven't dried yet. And you can let the yellow cover some of your petals below the center as well because peony petals don't have smooth edges. Without cleaning it, I get a little more of the earlier orange mix on my brush. Then I add that to some of the shadow area. Now you can clean your brush and add a bit of white to your yellow. Add a brush stroke or two to the light area of the center, then add even a bit more white to your mix and put in a bit of a highlight. Now let's get back to working on the petals again. Take some quinacridone red and add it to your previous mid-tone mix and begin adding it to the mid-tone areas of your petals. Quinacridone pigments are fairly transparent, so depending on how much you have left of your previous mix and how much cad red is now in your ratio, it should allow some of your previous layers to show through these brush strokes. I also continue to fill in some of the white areas of the canvas with this shade too, along with adding more depth to the layers I already painted. I bring in some of the lighter mix, which is a bit more opaque due to the titanium white, and keep filling in empty spaces as well as touching up some previous layers. At this point, I want to get the canvas covered in paint, so I use some of the somewhat lighter mix, not too far off a mid-tone, and paint petal shapes in to fill the blank spots. Remember to keep your petals in a C shape, following the curve of the center of the blossom, and having some variety to your shapes. I add a bit more white to my pink mix and do another layer of paler pink to the parts of the petals that would receive the most light. I go back to a mid-tone pink to keep filling in the white spaces on the canvas. Now I want to warm up the pink color I've been using, so I do a somewhat darker mix, but leaning to having more of the cadmium red than the quin red. I add a bit of the ultramarine blue to make it darker and just a bit purple. And I add this to some of the darker areas of the petals, slightly adjusting the paint color mix as I go. At this point, I want to make sure my petals look separate from each other, so I add this darker color in areas where two petals are starting to look like one petal. Add this darker color in quite a few areas throughout the blossom to give depth to the petals in your painting. Use the flat brush to your advantage, creating thin lines of shadow or wider areas of dark as needed. Let's soften some of the edges of the dark areas we just applied by adding a bit of white to the mix. Take your brush and add this to the darker areas, either just beside or slightly overlapping, and do this throughout your painting. To keep a nice loose feel, don't overly blend. You want your brush strokes to be seen. Lighten this mix a bit more, then add this to your petals in the lighter areas. Acrylics are meant to be layered. As you build up your layers, it creates a richness to your painting and gives you variety to your colors and textures. Keep building up your petals, adding more white to your mix again. Some of your edges won't be straight and smooth. Peony petals tend to be a bit uneven, almost raggedy, so occasionally use the narrow side of your brush to give your brushstrokes some variety. As we get to the final stages of the painting, look at your painting. Where does it need some lighter tones? Where does it need more depth with some darker shades? Add these layers now. And to finish off my painting, I add some final touches with some darker colors and call it done. Now I have a peony painting I can enjoy on my wall year-round.